and welcome to Lies, the part of the Extra History series where we tell you all the mistakes we made, all the things we had to leave out, and all the questionable history that got in. Anyway, this week, I actually only edited this series, so do you want to tell us who you are and a little bit about Genghis Khan?
Sure. So my name is Jack Shellberg. I wrote most of the Genghis Khan series with your assistance, and you are technically correct that it is pronounced Genghis Khan. That was one big question that we got, but Genghis Khan is also an acceptable pronunciation. It's just not the Mongolian pronunciation.
And so why did you choose Genghis Khan over Genghis Khan? Because I mean, I agree with you. I'm much more familiar with him being referred to as Genghis Khan. But what made you make that decision?
Well, that's a big part of it. So a lot of people would know who we were talking about if we said Genghis Khan, but would not know who we were talking about if we called him Genghis Khan. And also, we did that to spare Dan.
Fair enough. We had some people asking about whether Genghis Khan had red hair and green eyes. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure, so it is actually very technically possible that he could have had red hair and green eyes because the Mongolian people as a whole are a very ethnically diverse group. But it's highly unlikely that that's actually the case. There's only one account of Genghis Khan that has him looking that way, and that's from a 14th century Persian chronicler who had probably never seen him in person. And we don't have any surviving sculptures or pictures or anything like that to tell us what he would have looked like. So most accounts say that he was very large and scary with a big beard and long hair. That could be propaganda, but he was probably not red-haired.
Speaking of propaganda, so most of the time that I've read about Genghis Khan, especially sort of in a lot of modern texts, we see him as this bloodthirsty conqueror, right? And we got a little bit of a different picture of him in the story we got in these Extra History series. So tell me about the presentation that you were using.
Yeah, so he definitely was a conqueror, and definitely a lot of blood was spilled. But in this case, I wanted to try and tell the story that's less commonly told, because we are now learning, a lot of historians and scholars are discovering that many of the accounts, not all, but many of the accounts that we get of the sort of extreme terrors of Genghis Khan were almost certainly overstated, and some have been proven to be false. Things like they said that regions, millions of people were killed in certain regions where we know that only tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people even lived there. And we also know that the Mongols as a whole embarked on their own propaganda campaigns to spread exactly those kinds of rumors so that hopefully the people that they went to conquer would just surrender without any kind of a fight.
So, the Pyramids of Skulls. Truth or fact? Truth or fact, I like that. I'm gonna give more people that option.
Yes.
Truth or fiction? Fact or fiction? Mountains of Skulls, tell me about it.
Almost certainly fiction.
Alright, so, we've got this other presentation, and it's interesting because we have, because, as I said, many of the times I've encountered Genghis Khan, that more bloodthirsty warlord is what I get, and I think it's interesting to me always how much history is evolving and how much we're learning that different presentations were built for different times, right? But, so anyway, in the bloodthirsty warlord vein, you did mention that a number of areas of the world ended up depopulated because of Genghis Khan. So clearly still a lot of violence, but what sort of areas of the world were most affected by the Mongols in terms of depopulation?
Yeah, so one cool thing that we do have is we do have census records from the Middle Ages, and it looks like, judging by those records, that the population of China plummeted by tens of millions of people during Genghis Khan's lifetime there. And in his final campaign in Khwarezm, the population, that was modern-day Iran, the population was cut by about 3/4.
Wow. Wow. So whether or not it was directly human slaughter, there was a lot of death going on.
Yes, very much.
All right, so let's go back to Genghis Khan's mother. I was a little confused because I thought Hulin was a merkin? Meerkat?
Yes, that was a little confusing. So her husband was actually a merkit. You'll remember from the first episode that he actually traveled to her tribe to find a wife, but Olun was actually an Olkonud.
Speaking of Olun and sort of the origins of Genghis Khan, those first episodes seemed very epic, right? Very mythological, which I thought was great, but I was wondering how much of that, because when writing other extra history series, I've encountered sort of the same thing. So I was kind of curious to see how much of that we know for absolute certain.
So definitely the sort of bare facts of where he was from, who his enemies and allies were, who his parents were, all of that sort of thing is definitely true. But the main source that we have, the only source that we have for Temujin's childhood and early life is from a document called The Secret History of the Mongols. And The Secret History was a document that was written for the Mongol royal family after Genghis Khan's death. It existed only in a Mongolian script until the Ming Dynasty, which is the Chinese empire that actually deposed Kublai Khan, Temujin's grandson. And finally, the Mongolian text was translated into Chinese, and that's the document, the sort of obscure document that we have to this day. So it's been translated a lot of times, and it was also definitely written as a sort of a piece of mythology to sort of canonize Temujin's life and early history.
So, with the secret history, there are a lot of secret histories in history. With the secret history, you're saying that we don't have any biography of his, at least early life, that was written while he was alive?
No, the Mongols actually didn't even have an alphabet before Genghis Khan. That was one of the many things that Genghis Khan contributed to Mongol society.
So the picture we're going to get is clearly one that's painted by people who not only want to mythologize him, but want to mythologize him after he's created this great empire, right? After he's seen as Genghis Khan, as the Great Khan, right?
Yes, there are definitely a couple of things that historians now pretty much universally agree are in the secret history that are not completely accurate. The most significant one probably being the legitimacy of his son. The secret history sort of goes out of its way to construct a timeline where it was sort of hypothetically possible that his wife could have given birth to his son before she was kidnapped.
Who is the he in this case?
Oh, sorry, that's Temujin.
Okay, so the efforts to legitimize Genghis Khan's son.
Right.
So remind me a little bit about what happened and
Sure.
yeah.
So his wife was kidnapped,
Okay.
and she came back pregnant and gave
Right.
birth to his first son, Jochi. The secret history says that it was exactly 9 months that she was kidnapped, so that and that Temujin must have impregnated his wife Borte, and then she was kidnapped, and then she came back and
Yeah.
gave birth. But that's almost certainly not what actually happened.
Fair enough. So usually in these Lies episodes, I take a little while to tell any interesting stories that I thought were great, but didn't really have time to tell in the actual episodes themselves. Is there anything about the conquest or Genghis Khan's life, just little side stories that you want to share with everybody that you couldn't fit in?
Yeah, totally. So one of the coolest moments in Genghis Khan's story is in his battle, his sort of final battle against Jamukha. You'll remember from the episode that his forces sort of run off to go and chase a band of people, and they're separated from their forces, and the fighting goes until nightfall, and then they set up camp, and Temujin is wounded in the neck. So one story that we didn't get to tell was that his second in command actually stayed with him all night, and because the Mongols at the time they really didn't like blood. They felt like it was like a sacred thing that was sort of like being spilled. So that's actually why they were archers and had long spears, because they didn't want to get any blood on them. But his second in command was so loyal to him that he actually drank the blood of his commander so that it wouldn't touch the ground and be sort of defiled.
Wow.
And after doing so, Genghis Khan, in sort of a drunken stupor, asked for something to drink, and they only had water in the camp. So his loyal second in command decided to strip naked, sneak into the enemy camp because he figured that they would be so embarrassed for someone who was naked that they wouldn't draw attention to him. And it worked. He snuck into their camp. He didn't find anything for him to drink, but he found some food for Temujin and brought it back and nursed him back to health. And the Secret History goes out of its way to sort of commend this very loyal second in command of his.
That is quite the story. What else? Anything else that that really comes to mind?
One of going back to sort of the questionable moments in the Secret History that's probably not true, but is sort of too good not to tell, is according to the Secret History, after Jamuka is defeated by Temujin, he hides in the woods until eventually his own soldiers actually capture him and deliver him to Temujin. According to the Secret History, Temujin actually executed those men for being disloyal to their leader, because sort of military discipline and structure was sort of his jam, and Jamuka sort of begged Temujin to execute him, even though Temujin offered mercy. And while I have a feeling, this is sort of my own personal opinion, that that's probably a much more rosy picture, that I bet Jamuka didn't just insist that he deserved an execution instead of mercy. I still think that it is probably true that Temujin did execute Jamuka's soldiers for betraying their commander, because he would know that he could never incorporate someone like that into his own army.
And I think we had talked about beforehand a little bit about a series that I'm doing coming up. There was something here that touches on mathematics.
That is correct. So this is just sort of a very tiny anecdote, but Khwarizm, the city that the Mongols raided and dismantled in the early 1220s, was the home of the mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, whose name we get the word algorithm from. So Al-Khwarizm, algorithm. We
get a very butchered sort of Romanization attempt on Al-Khwarizm, which becomes algorithm.
Yeah, and just to point out, that was hundreds of years before Genghis Khan even got there, so that just shows you how amazingly advanced those Muslim nations were in that day.
Well, and we're going to get to a lot of that a couple series down the road. Those of you who are patrons, you probably know which one you voted on and which thing about math I'm going to be talking about a little ways down the line. But there's just one last thing before we go, and it's a Walpole fact. Correct me if I'm wrong, because this is super convoluted, but it's amazing. Okay, so 13th century China, there was a play produced called The Orphan of China. It's the first play to ever be adapted from Chinese into a European language. And it was adapted into English. Why was it adapted into English? To make fun of Sir Robert Walpole. The playwright was using this like Chinese play and the Chinese politics as a not so veiled like poke at the policies that Robert Walpole was implementing. But what makes it a real Walpole fact is there's one more layer. Voltaire then took that same play and adapted it into French. And when he adapted it into French, he changed the setting up completely. So it's about the Mongols now, and it's set right next to the Great Wall, and he's doing it to impugn the Manchus in China. But this became so popular in France that guess what? Robert Walpole Jr., Sir Robert Walpole's son, right, backs the intellectual property theft of this play. He basically backs cheap knockoff versions of this Voltaire play to be produced in England because it was that popular. So Walpole all around. Coming up shortly, we are next week going to cover the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and then after that, we're going to cover the Empire of Mali, which is going to be really exciting and something that so rarely gets touched on in just general history courses, so that one's gonna be a lot of fun. I don't know if fun's actually the right word for it, but there are definitely fun moments. Yes, anybody who literally tosses gold left and right while on pilgrimage, anyone who crashes the markets by spending too much gold, that's gonna be a good time. Also, up with this video is should be the Kyners music, which was fantastic. Should you like the music? We should have also posted today just a music video playing their tunes. So as you're working, if you want to listen to that. And yeah, join us next week for the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Thank you everybody, and see you then.